Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus A330 pilot, and today I'm going to show you how to plan a long-range flight under engines turning or passengers swimming regulations. ETOPS. Well, we're gonna start saying that ETOPS is no longer the current term. It's now Extended Diversion Time Operations, EDTO. However, due to how widespread the word ETOPS actually is, ICAO has allowed its continued use, and that is what regulating bodies have done, so the FAA and EASA are now using the term ETOPS still, while officially since 2012 it is EDTO. ETOPS itself originally stood for Extended Twin Engine Operations, but it's been redefined now as Extended Diversion Time Operations. So let's now go ahead and do our basic planning. Now for the most basic stuff, I've got a more comprehensive tutorial on that, on how to plan a basic flight realistically using Simbrief, so I will only skim quickly over that and then continue with the long-range aspects of the flight later on. So starting with the basics, we want to fly today from Frankfurt to Detroit. And we are going to use an Airbus A330-300 aircraft for that. Now, first of all, let's quickly get a real-world flight number from Flight Radar 24, and I skipped add to that already and collected it for you guys down here. For more details on this, again, see my video linked in the description below on general Simbrief flight planning. So this is going to be Lufthansa Flight 442 under the call sign Lufthansa 3 Victor. So let's go ahead and enter that. I'm going to start with the airline, DLH 442, and our call sign is going to be Lufthansa 3 Victor. Registration today is going to be Delta Alpha India Kilo India. And in terms of the cost index, we are going to use cost index 30. Many airlines are still using fixed cost indexes while flying transatlantic, while other airlines are using a variable cost index system or just fly continuous Mach number at all. Now, we are going to use fixed cost index 30 for today's flight, since that is what our airline's operations department has determined to be the most economic for the airline. Okay, now let's go ahead and move on to the more interesting part. So, North Atlantic operations, payload. Now, most transatlantic flights are really full of passengers, so the Lufthansa aircraft got something in the region of about 300 seats, so let's just take 300 passengers on today's flight. Also, many airlines are selling space in their cargo compartments to cargo operators, so that cargo is also being shipped on those flights. In case of Lufthansa, their cargo company Lufthansa Cargo is actually selling cargo space on their aircraft, so let's just say that we are going to carry 3 tons of freight in our cargo holds. Next up, let's quickly determine our departure runway. Those who are familiar with Frankfurt and looking at the present weather conditions with the wind coming from about a southerly direction will know that it's going to be 25 center for the departure. Again, more details on that in the linked video. So with our basic setup done, let's now move ahead to the stuff that is going to become more interesting for our operation, for our long-haul operation. We're going to start having a look at the significant weather chart. Remember, our departure time is going to be around 1200 Zulu, while our arrival is going to be at around 2000 Zulu, so we got to have a look at 2 charts. First of all, we've got the 1200 Zulu chart, and then we've got the 1800 Zulu chart published later on. So, starting with the 1200 charts, we've got a couple of things published over here. There's some light icing published in our departure sector, but only until flight level 180, so that's not going to be much of our concern. Slight jet stream over here, which is picking up pace from just the middle of Ireland. Then we've got a little bit of weather over here, for which we can quickly find our details. Published in here, again moderate icing until flight level 190. And then moving on, we've got a jet stream facing us ahead with a core at flight level 310 here. And moving further onwards, once we are reaching Canada, let's move ahead to the 1800 Zulu chart. As you can see over here, there's some light turbulence until flight level 350 and moderate icing until flight level 180. What's also good to have a look at is the level of the tropopause along our flight, since typically above the tropopause we would not be facing any weather conditions anymore. You can see over here it's flight level 340, flight level 220, which is the lowest in the area, and then again flight level 300, up here in the north 340. So these are the basic conditions that we are facing for a flight. Now, when doing short to medium haul flights, typically you would find weather conditions don't have too much of an impact on the route of flight. Normally, for example, between Frankfurt and Palma de Mallorca, there is like 2 different routes that airline can choose from, and they're going to go for either one or the other, typically based on slots that are limiting, or let's just call it political limitations, including air traffic control limitations. But weather typically doesn't play too much of a role there. For long haul, that's different. On long haul, the weather conditions is basically what's defining where we are going to fly. And Simbrief does not necessarily pick the most optimal route of flight for you. So let's have a look at our route of flight and our considerations given there now, before we are then going to move into the ETOPS planning section. Starting with the basics, we've got our North Atlantic track system. Now, as you can see, there's 2 sets of track published up here. Now, the westbound tracks are typically active during daytime, while the nighttime tracks are the eastbound tracks. Now, today, since we only care about the westbound tracks, let's only display those. Now, starting from there, we do have 5 tracks published. However, it is not mandatory for you to use them. You can plan anything, and as long as the flight on your random route is possible, ATC is going to give it to you. The tracks really are just a form of the, let's call it, most economic way to cross the Atlantic for aircraft flying in round about that direction. What do I mean with that? Well, let's have a look at an alternative routing that we can use. As I mentioned, Simbrief does not necessarily plan the most optimal routing, because the Simbrief route generator seems to not take into account any wind conditions. So let's have a look at some alternatives. If we move down here to the route section, my personal favorite is this one, ed-gla.co.uk, and when we click on the button, it's automatically opening the website. Now, more details on that in the video link below, but rest assured, we've got a flight over here matching our route of flight with an A340-600 from the 18th of November, so just about a week prior to recording of the video. So let's go ahead and take that, and we're going to take the route of flight that we've got down here. Copy that, back to Simbrief, and insert. Let's calculate on that. So you can see the real-world route from about a week ago is much more northerly than what Simbrief had calculated for us. Now, how do we find out which one is the most optimal? Well, let's take it simple. We're going to take the Simbrief route at first, and we are going to quickly fix that SID, and now hit generate flight. Let's see what we're going to end up with. So the flight is calculated, and you can see we're getting 8 hours and 56 of flight time for the route that Simbrief had calculated. Now let's go to edit once more, and this time we are going to insert the route that we found on the real-world flight plan database. So let's have a look at that. Insert, generate. And here we go, 8 hours and 54. So you can see the route that we found on ed-gla, in this case, is more economical than the standard route that Simbrief has generated for us. So let's continue the rest of our planning process with that random route that we have gotten over here. Alright, so back into the planning process. Now that we've decided on our route, let's go ahead and decide on our ETOPS segment. So we're going to start with the ETOPS scenario down here. I'm just going to go for auto-calculated first, and as you can see, that is what Simbrief comes up with. Now, few points on that one. The automatic calculation from Simbrief is typically not very accurate. First of all, it takes diversion airports that you don't really want to use. And secondly, it changes the target ETOPS scenario around quite a bit. Now, for our aircraft, let's take 180 minutes ETOPS scenario. That is the most common scenario you're going to find with aircraft. Talking about the target scenario down here, listen up any of you 3 and 4 engine drivers. Now, back in the day when ETOPS regulations were established, they were meant at 2 engine airplane only. that is no longer the case. In 2012, when the EDTO regulations were established, a driving factor behind establishing them was to create common rules for all aircraft flying. While it is true that two-engine aircraft are limited by the diversion time they can take, it is paramount to understand that three- and four-engine aircraft are also limited, not on the diversion time, but on other factors. So basically you want to draw up what ETOP calls, or what Simbrief calls an ETOP scenario for any airplane, even if you're flying a 747, or even if you're flying your favorite 8-engined airplane. Now, let's go back to the planning calculation. A two-engine aircraft is by default limited to a flight time of 60 minutes to the nearest diversion airport. ETOP's regulation, however, made it possible to extend that time, and the most common scenario seen today is 180 minutes to the nearest suitable diversion airport. However, there's different scenarios possible, ranging all the way up to 370 minutes nowadays, and 370 minutes basically covers the entire globe. With 180 minutes, there's only very few regions of the world that you can no longer fly about, and even 120 minutes ETOP scenario, as you still see in some of the older airlines, covers most of the North Atlantic with the exception of a little gap just about down here. So, with our 180 minutes scenario today, the entire North Atlantic is covered, so we can continue our flight planning without any worries about that. Now let's talk about which alternate airports you can actually use over the North Atlantic. For that, I am going to turn over to the Navigraph charts, because I do find them a little bit easier to use when talking about this. On the European side of things, we've got Shannon as the most commonly seen alternate airport, and then obviously moving up to Scotland, you've got, for example, Glasgow. And then on the Iceland side of things, there is Keflavik as a suitable diversion airport over there. Moving a little bit further southbound, Santiago is also a commonly used alternate airport, so is Brest up here. Now, moving on into the westerly direction, Greenland does basically not have any airport that would really suit you for a diversion, unless you've got a time-critical emergency like a fire in your aircraft. Also take note that in Greenland there is not a high amount of hospitals, so if you've got a passenger that's ill, then Greenland is usually not going to be a good choice for you. And the final point over here is that the firefighting capabilities on Greenland's airports are not very good as well. So basically forget Greenland when you're doing your planning on a wide-body airplane. With a narrow-body airplane, things are a little bit different. Sandefjord is an adequate airport for that. Narsarsuaq down here can sometimes be used as well with 1,600 meters runway. So with a narrow-body airplane, those can be taken into account. With a wide-body airplane, typically they are not suited for your diversions. Even though Sondrestromfjord up here is a suitable airport, technically, and therefore, in case you want to cross the Atlantic with an airplane that does not have ETOPS approval, you can take that little corridor that you can see up here, where you're basically flying from Canada over to Sondrestromfjord to Keflavik and then down to Europe, where you can cross the North Atlantic without the need for an ETOPS approval. Alright, today though, we have a wide-body airplane, so continuing the list of our suitable airports on the North American side of things, when we move in here, we can see we've got Goose Bay up here, and then we've got Gander. Down here you would find St. John's, and then there's Stephenville on Newfoundland as well. All of those are suitable for the diversion of wide-body aircraft and have the abilities to handle those aircraft. But you need to keep in mind that Goose Bay, Gander and St. John's basically are former military airports, and therefore there is no really big cities or anything close by, so the amount of medical facilities you have there is rather limited. Therefore, for planning purposes, those are regularly used, but in actual operations, if it is possible to continue, for example, down here to Halifax, to Moncton, then you would typically prefer to do that or to fly back to Iceland, where you've got proper medical facilities available for your passengers as well. Now, since we're talking about flight planning today, we can, however, assume any of those airports to be generally suitable. Now, talking about an airport being suitable, what does that actually mean? Well, we need to take into account the NOTAMs and the weather. Now, NOTAMs, the most important things you can hit over there is a downgraded fire and rescue service capability. So, for example, for the Airbus A330, we need a minimum of RFFS 4 for ETOPS planning. And there are times where NOTAMs do downgrade those airports below these standards, so that's something to take into account. The other thing, obviously, is the weather. You all know North Atlantic weather can be heavy at times, so we are going to have a practical look into it now. First of all, we don't want to use Thunderstorm Fjord, as I mentioned, so let's go ahead and change that scenario, and let's take the nearest North American airport here, which is going to be Goose Bay, Charlie Yankee Yankee Romeo. Let's hit validate on that and see what we're going to come up with. So this is the new circles that we have now. We've got the ETOPS entry here from Keflavik and the ETOPS exit here from Goose Bay. And the area in between we need to cover with an ETOPS flight. So now let's go ahead and have a look at which airports we can plan. The easiest scenario for us would be simply to take Keflavik, hit validate, and you can see the circle from Keflavik basically covers the entire ETOPS scenario, so that is all you need. Provided that the weather in Keflavik is suitable, of course. We can already see a little caution here from Simbrief, but we're going to talk about that in a moment. It is preferable, though, if we've got two alternates available. It's not mandatory, but preferable. So let's go ahead and enter our ETOPS exit airport, Goose Bay, hit validate, and you can see now we have an equal time point generated in the middle here as well. So these are our general ETOPS setups now. Now let's check if the airports we've chosen as alternate are actually adequate for the flight that we want to do. So there are certain weather limitations we need to take into account, planning limitations I need to say, because once you're airborne, they don't matter anymore. Technically speaking, once you're off block, they even don't matter anymore, but you want to think about if you're still on the ground and your weather falls below the minimum. You want to think about whether you actually want to continue or not. Now, today let's talk about our planning minima though. And for a precision approach, that's an ILS, a GLS, or an MLS. For a precision approach, you need your minima to be upgraded a bit. So we are going to start with precision approaches, meaning the standard minimum for that is 200 feet above the ground. However, you need to check every single airport and the approaches that you would take in case you have a little higher minima there. And onto that minimum, you need to add 200 foot of cloud ceiling and 800 meters RVR. For a non-precision approach, that's anything like an RNAV, VOR, NDB, and so on. For a non-precision approach, you need your cloud ceiling plus 400 feet and RVR plus 1,500 meters. So let's now, with that knowledge, have a look into the airports that we've chosen. So we've got Keflavik over here. And if we have a look at the Keflavik airport, first thing over here is the NOTAMs. So for aircraft on 2 stands, the fuel hydrant system is not available, but refueling trucks are, so not a problem. And there are some sequenced flashing strobe lights on runway 01 and 28 unserviceable. That one might be interesting for our approaches. So let's now go ahead and have a look at the chart of the airport in question. And for us today, that is going to be initially Keflavik. In terms of the airport itself, we've got a runway configuration 01 and 28. And looking into the weather forecast, we need to determine the weather from the earliest time of arrival. So that is when you initially fly here, minus 1 hour, to the latest time of arrival, that is flying to the equal time point, turning around, landing, plus an hour. In order to determine those times, we quickly need to generate our flight so that Simbrief tells us how long we are going to need until we reach each of those points. So the earliest time of landing in Keflavik would be somewhere along here, so about 3.5 hours into the flight. And now from the equal time point, 4 hours and 33 into the flight, 1 hour 52 diversion, so let's make that easy and call it 6.5 hours plus 1 hour, so 7.5 hours into the flight. So going back to the menu, we want to depart at 12:40, and the earliest time of arrival is at some point at about 3.5 hours, so minus 1 hour, so 2.5 hours into the flight. Call it 1500 to make it easy, and the latest is plus 8.5, so around about 2000. So that's the weather period that we need to have a look at. So going back into the planning for Keflavik, we've got the basic forecast, 4.5 kilometers, with a wind coming from the southeast, light rain and drizzle, broom scattered 500, broken 1800. Then we've got probe 40 tempo, 900 meters visibility, and broken clouds 200 feet. So now we're going to have a look into the chart with that knowledge. Wind 150 at 17, that means the basic runways we can use are 10 and 19. And now, having a look into the approaches, we've got an ILS 10, which has a Cat 2 approach published, with a 100 foot minimum and 300 meters RVR. And we've got the Cat 1 approach with a 200 foot minimum and 550 meters RVR. Now you need to think about, okay, in case of a diversion, are we going to be limited on any of these? If we fly an A330, we can still do a Cat 2 approach with an engine failure. If we would fly, for example, a 737 MAX, then you could only do a Cat 1 approach with an engine failure. So depending on that, you need to take into account, in case you have an engine failure, which of the approaches can you use. So in case of a 737, for example, Cat 1. In case of the A330, Cat 2. Alright, so let's just take the Cat 2 minima here, which is 100 feet above ground and 300 RVR. So to that, we add the minimum of 100 plus 200 feet. So we need a cloud ceiling at 300 feet and an RVR of 300 meters plus 800 meters, so 1,100 meters. So we need 300 foot ceiling, 1,100 meters RVR to be able to use that approach. Going back, we can already see the clouds are broken 200, so we cannot fly that approach. Now, that is runway 10. We can have a look, and in terms of the RVR, we are out as well, by the way. We can quickly have a look at runway 19, but you're going to see we end up with the same minima. So Keflavik is not usable as an ETOPS alternate airport for this flight. So we need to decide on a new one. Now, typically, in Iceland we only have Keflavik. So let's move down to Ireland. And on this one we are going to, by default, always use Shannon. And if we take Shannon, hit validate, you can already see Simbrief doesn't come up with any problems, but let's cross-check that. We're going to go onto the planning information for Shannon over here. NOTAM-wise, that's not too important, it's only from the evening of today. And those down here don't matter. So NOTAM-wise, Shannon is good. Weather-wise, 360 at 12, 10 kilometers, few clouds 1,000, broken 2,500. Few clouds doesn't matter for the cloud ceiling. A ceiling is defined by being broken or more. Scattered, depending on the source that you look into, depending on the local country regulations, can be considered a cloud ceiling or may not be considered as a cloud ceiling. That's different depending on the local regulation. So for us, we don't assume scattered as a cloud ceiling, so only broken and overcast are ceilings. So you can already say that we've got the ceiling in 2,500 feet and the visibility is going to be 10 kilometers or more. So now, looking into the charts and what we've got available, Shannon shows us runway 2406, and for the approaches, looking into the ILS 24, we can see same minima that we had published for Keflavik as well. So 100 foot minima plus 200 feet makes 300 foot cloud ceiling, 300 meters RVR plus 800 meters is 1,100, so we need 300 foot ceiling, 1,100 meters RVR, and looking into that over here, we can basically say that Shannon does meet our planning minima. So Shannon is an acceptable alternate. Alright, now we go to the other side of the pond, and over here we can once again start. We had 6 hours as minimum time after takeoff for when we need to be able to land in Goose Bay, and minus 1 hour, so we're looking at roughly 1700 UTC. And then the latest time of landing there, again, around about 2000 UTC. So let's have a look into Goose Bay now. The forecast is from 1500 with visibility more than 6 miles, broken clouds 1200, overcast 8000, and we've got a temporary weather from 1500 till 0300, so that's the cloud ceiling that counts for us, with broken clouds and 2500 feet. When we go to the charts for Goose Bay and have a look at the airport layout, we can see that runway 26 is basically the one that we are going to be landing on, so runway 26, more than long enough for our aircraft. And now looking into the approaches available for runway 26, we've got an RNAV approach in there. For the RNAV approach, remember, we need the minima plus 400 feet and the RVR plus visibility plus 1,500 meters. So, first of all, we need to determine which minimum we can use. And LPV minima, we are not certified to do that in our airline, so LPV is out. That leaves us with LNAV VNAV or LNAV minima. Now, if you want to take things really realistic, on a lot of older A330s, there is an OEB published saying that you are not allowed to use the final approach mode on a certain number of airports. So when final approach cannot be used, you need to use FPA mode for your descent. And when you do that, you no longer have a VNAV minima, so then you could use LNAV minimum only. So depending on the airplane that you fly, you might be restricted over here when you're doing long range with Airbuses. Now, for our case, let's assume that the final approach mode can be used, so we can use the LNAV and VNAV minima. We've got 250 feet minima over here, and we add to that 400 feet, so we end up with 650 for our cloud base. And we've got 1 statute mile published as visibility for the approach. 1 statute mile is 1,600 meters, plus 1,500, so we need 3.1 kilometers of visibility to be allowed to fly the approach. Going back into our forecast, we can see more than 6 miles is forecast, so we absolutely meet our minimum visibility, and the cloud base is going to be 2,500 feet, so we also meet the cloud base. A final word over here on what I just did when talking about the minimum here, because I just remember now that some may not be aware. So you can see the minimum is published in 2 ways. You've got the minimum here as 403 feet, which is the barometric minimum, and then in the brackets behind that you've got the minimum as height above the airport, which is 250 feet. So 403 barometric and 250 feet height above the actual airfield elevation. Now, METARs and TAFs are always going to give you the cloud bases above field elevation. So when we look at an airport like this, which has an elevation of 160 feet, and we've got a cloud published at a few 2,500, that means that in barometric altitude, this is actually going to be more 2,650. But the height above the field for the cloud is going to be 2,500. For that reason, you could see that I used the radio minimum here, so the height above the field, 250, rather than 403 in order to determine the minimum cloud height. Alright, with that we have just determined that Goose Bay is a suitable airport, so let's now hit generate flight and have a look at what Simbrief is going to present us with. And here we go. That is our final flight plan as we have now calculated it through Simbrief. So, a couple of things that we just want to go over with when our final flight plan is there. I'm going to go into more details on that in a separate video, but just want to do something really quick here. First of all, let's have a look at the significant weather chart. You can see there is basically no significant weather along our route of flight. That jet stream down there is in flight level 290. If we look in here, we can see we're planning flight level 380, so should be well outside the range of possible turbulence. that's published over here. So basically we don't expect any significant weather phenomena along our route of flight. In case we need to descend, down here there's some icing published, and there is some turbulence published in the later part in flight level 350. So only in case we need to descend, we would actually possibly run into trouble. And that is our basic planning for the long-range flight. That's also going to do it for today's video, and with that I would like to say thank you very much for watching. I do hope that you learned something today. Now go ahead and plan your own flights, and with that, with more and more long-haul aircraft coming out, like the 787, the TFDI MD-11 and the PMDG 777 all coming very soon, you can really look forward, but you can also start practicing now. With that, we are going to finish today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on a future one. If you did indeed like the video, be sure to hit the like button in YouTube as well, as it does help with the YouTube algorithms. Comment to let me know what you think about this one, and subscribe if you're interested in more and in some videos featuring the cockpit procedures on board the Airbus long-haul aircraft very soon. Thank you for your attention, and I see you all again on the next one.